Week 14 of the NFL season is officially in the books, and there was a lot that took place this week. The week kicked off with the Lions putting up 40-plus points for the third time this year, and that set the tone for a lot of high-scoring affairs in Week 14. The Bills and Bengals would go on to combine for 73 points, as Josh Allen and Joe Burrow would combine for 8 total touchdowns, and just as everyone thought, the Titans and Browns would combine for 60 total points too. And in today's video, we're going to break down the biggest winners and losers from Week 14. And there was a lot that took place this week, and as always, there will be several more winners and losers listed on the screen at the end of the video. And if you could like the video before we start, a football will appear when you do, and it would also be very much appreciated and help tremendously with the almighty YouTube algorithm. And with that preface out of the way, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing the Buffalo Bills. The Bills beat the Bengals in Week 14 with a score of 39-34, and this was a game Buffalo desperately needed for a few reasons. Entering Week 14, there were 6 teams with 8 or more wins in the AFC, and obviously we know it's anyone's game in terms of the wildcard seedings. And with the Patriots sitting at 11-2 during their Week 14 bye, with the schedule they had ahead of them, well, I think everyone would be shocked at this point if they don't win the division. And entering Week 14, the Ravens and Steelers were tied atop the AFC North, each with a 6-6 record, so while the Bengals entered the game with a 4-8 record, their season was still very much alive. And Josh Allen had an MVP caliber performance as he had over 320 total yards, as well as 4 touchdowns, and given the Bills play the Browns and Jets in 2 of their final 4 games of the 2025 season, you would like to think they'll finish the year with at least 11 wins. And the other 2 games are at the Patriots and home against the Eagles, and they can of course win those games too, though they're obviously viewed a lot different than the Browns and Jets respectfully. And I know the Bengals were only 4-8 entering Week 14, but it legitimately felt like a playoff game, and they finally beat Joe Burrow's Bengals. Christian Benford also had a tremendous game in Week 14 as he had a pick 6 and did a really good job of covering Jamar Chase throughout the entire game. And if you would have been told before the game that the Bengals would put up 34 points and be told Jamar Chase would only have 5 receptions for 44 yards, well, I don't think many people would have believed you. This was also a really good performance by Buffalo, as it was a continuation from the second half against Pittsburgh in Week 13, in which they beat the Steelers 23-0 at Acrisure Stadium. And I think in the best case scenario right now, the Bills can enter Week 18 against the Jets with a wildcard spot secured and rest their starters before they try for a playoff run. But in what was pretty close to a playoff game, the Bills came out on top and Josh Allen played like an MVP. The Jags are also big winners for Week 14 for a few reasons, and through 14 weeks, they sit atop the AFC South with a 9-4 record, and believe it or not, because I don't feel like this is being discussed enough, the Jags have won 4 in a row and have won 5 of their last 6 games since their Week 8 bye. And I know Daniel Jones was hurt in this game, and we'll address the Colts later in the video, but the Jags also put up 36 points, and again, something that is not being talked about nationally is this team is averaging 30.3 points per game since their bye. And within this game against the Colts, they forced multiple turnovers, and one of the biggest things that we hammer home on this channel is taking advantage of other teams' mistakes. And even when Daniel Jones was in the game, Devin Lloyd had a beautiful interception, and a few plays later, Travis Etienne scored to put the Jags on the board. There was also another play in the second quarter where Jonathan Taylor fumbled and the Jags recovered, and the very next play, Travis Etienne scored to put the Jags up double digits. Then later in the second quarter, down 11, the Colts went for it on 4th down and didn't get it, and the Jags started into another touchdown drive to put them up 28-10 at half. And the Jags are quietly top 10 in both offensive and defensive points per game this year. And when we're not getting Jekyll and Trevor, and we're getting good Trevor Lawrence, and not very bad interceptions Trevor Lawrence, this team can compete with anybody. And with their final 4 games, I would be pretty surprised if this team doesn't win 12 games in Liam Cohen's first year as head coach. And this was a huge win for the Jags. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are up, and they're in today's video for a few reasons, and the biggest reason that outtrumps all of them is because I worry about where this franchise is headed. Once upon a time, this franchise was 5-1, Baker Mayfield was playing like an MVP candidate, and Through 6 weeks of this season, Baker had a 12-to-1 TD to INT ratio. He was on pace for a 34-to-3 TD to INT ratio, and there was a point earlier this year, believe it or not, just 7 or 8 weeks ago, where we were talking about the 2018 quarterback class kind of in those 2004 or 1983 conversations, where Sam Darnold was balling, Baker Mayfield was balling, and then of course you have 2 MVP winners in Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. But since then, those conversations have cooled, and in a lot of ways it's been a tale of 2 seasons for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and ultimately Baker Mayfield. And in the remaining 7 games, or the following 7 games, Baker has a TD to INT ratio of just 8-to-5, and the Buccaneers are 2-5 since starting out 5-1. And their 2 wins within those 7 games, you might ask? Well, one of them was against the New Orleans Saints and rookie quarterback Tyler Shuck in a game where the Saints committed 4 turnovers, and Anthony Nelson actually had a 4-yard pick 6 in that game, so it was very much a tip the ball up and I'm going to just walk it right in. And the other was against the Arizona Cardinals, who are probably going to make major changes at season's end, and the Cardinals are 3-10 for a reason. They started out 2-0 and are 1-10 in their last 11 games. Those are the Bucs' 2 most recent wins, and since the loss to Detroit on Monday night a couple of weeks ago, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have looked nowhere close to the team that they did in the first 6 weeks of the year. Now, injuries have severely impacted this team, and that part obviously has to be noted, but they have a minus 26 point difference on the year. The pass rush is very concerning, and I have a lot of concerns with where the state of this roster is, and the reality is the NFC South is not a good division. We're not talking about the Panthers here, more specifically about the Falcons and Saints and the state of their current rosters, and if you can't win the NFC South with this roster that the Buccaneers have, then there are a lot bigger problems, and losing to the Saints in Week 14 is kind of the cherry on top for the frustration that the Buccaneers have endured over the past 2 months. Now, the biggest thing that I do want to hammer home is the Bucs have had very poor injury luck this year, and they've had a long year in that regard, but there's also an aspect where they are underperforming, which that part goes back on coaching. And the biggest thing to me with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at this point is when healthy, they are between a good and great team, and I'm going to be honest, between Todd Bowles and Josh Grizzard, I'm not exactly inspired by the Bucs coaching staff, and I do think in some ways that the coaching staff will hold this team back even when they are healthy. And hypothetically, if the Bucs do make the postseason, because they play the Panthers 2 times in their final 4 games, and if in the best case scenario they sweep the Panthers and then they split the games between the Falcons and Dolphins, they finish the year with a 10-7 record, do we really think this team is going to do anything in the postseason when it matters? Are they going to beat the Seahawks if they come down to Tampa in the wild card round? I personally don't think so. Now, we do acknowledge that they beat the Seahawks earlier in the year in what was one of the best games of the 2025 regular season, if we're being honest, but with where the Bucs currently are, unless there is a major change in the next month, which I don't think there's going to be, then I think the Bucs, if they even make the playoffs, are destined for a wild card round exit. The Washington Commanders are in today's video for a few reasons, and it's more than just because they lost 31-0 to the Vikings in Week 14. There are a couple of things that I do want to note, at least positively for the Commanders prior to this segment, is they lost to the Broncos by 1 point in Week 13. They took them to overtime. It was a very close game, and the Broncos are 11-2. They have a very good defense. Nobody would be surprised if they go to the AFC Championship game or maybe even the Super Bowl this year. So for Washington to have a yin and yang type difference between Week 13 and 14, where they are going toe-to-toe with one of the league's best teams and then get beat 31-0 against a team and ultimately a quarterback that was, well, really awful prior to that game, that speaks volumes about where the Washington Commanders defense currently is, and their head coach, Dan Quinn, is of course a defensive-centric coach. And now we do acknowledge that the Commanders have been dealt with a fair share of injuries this year, obviously, but there's also something to be said about the effort and the commitment to the team has once they're down and how they battle back, and there wasn't a whole lot of battling back in the second half against Minnesota in Week 14, and that's some of the reason as to why they're in today's video. Also, whether you know this or not, the Washington Commanders, once upon a time, were a 3-2 football team, and now they're 3-10, and specifically within Week 14, JJ McCarthy threw 3 touchdowns to no interceptions, and whether you know this or not, this was the first game of JJ McCarthy's NFL career in which he didn't throw an interception. People talk about get-right games and, hey, we are going to play this team, so we're going to look a little better, and we can have this game be as a confidence booster moving forward. That is who the Washington Commanders are right now. Whether it was J.J. McCarthy having by far the best game of his career, and by the way, the Vikings were coming off of a game in Week 13 in which they were beat 26-0, and even before that, a game in which they had not put up a touchdown as they lost 23-6. And again, another fun fact here is the Vikings, prior to the Week 14 game against Washington, had not put up a touchdown since prior to Thanksgiving, and we are now in the middle of December, or approaching the middle of December. So for Washington to have this type of regression this year is kind of alarming, if we're being honest. Whether it was Michael Penix having the best game of his season against Washington in a year where Michael Penix didn't look good prior to injury, or whether it was Sam Darnold going 16 of 16 in the first half on primetime in the Commander Stadium, by the way, or whether it was the Lions putting up 40 plus points and having another 500-yard game, which was their 7th since 2022, again in the Commander Stadium, or even Dallas putting up 40 plus points against the Commanders. That's the type of year that it's been for Washington. Suffice to say, it's been a very long year for the Commanders and their fan base, and given they are 3-10 right now with an 8-game losing streak, they have 4 division games to end the year. And if in the scenario the Commanders lose all 4 division games and finish the 25 season with a 12-game losing streak, then I think there is a conversation worth having of whether or not Dan Quinn is the head coach for this team in 2026. The Green Bay Packers are up after they beat the Bears 28-21, and the Packers are in today's video for several reasons, but the biggest of course is with this win, the Packers are back on top of the NFC North. And this game came down to the wire as Keyshawn Nixon had a game-sealing interception on a 4th down play to push the Packers to 9-3-1 through 14 weeks. And we discussed this in the Week 14 recap, but Jordan Love was tremendous in this game outside of the one big play. And it's easy to say now that the Packers are 9-3-1, but just 4 weeks ago, they were coming off of a 10-7 loss to the Eagles, and things weren't looking great. They had just lost back-to-back games to the Panthers and Eagles, and there were a lot of questions about this team's consistency, especially since they had also lost to the Browns earlier in the year, and there were a lot of comments of, this team is good, but can they really do it when it matters, and can they win 3 or 4 games in a row? And the Packers have won 4 games in a row since that Eagles game, with the biggest of all coming in Week 14 against Chicago. Jordan Love's stat line was pretty good in this game as he threw for 234 yards and 3 touchdowns, but there are times when I watch him play and can't help but think, when he's on, this is an elite quarterback. And over the last 2 weeks, Love has 7 touchdowns to 1 interception, and the Packers beat the Lions and Bears in the process. And they also have 3 straight division wins as they beat Minnesota back in Week 12 too. So for the Packers to beat the Bears and to have Jordan Love look good, and to control their destiny from here on out pertaining to the NFC North, well, they are big winners from Week 14. And because the Bears lost, the Rams are also big winners from Week 14 because they now sit atop the NFC with a 10-3 record. The Rams are top 4 in scoring on both sides of the football, and they had a field day against Arizona in Week 14. They had 530 yards of offense, and obviously the Rams have been a very good team in the Sean McVay era and have been Super Bowl contenders for the majority of the time period, but believe it or not, Week 14 of 2025 was the first time this team had 500 yards of offense since Matt Stafford became a Ram, and this was the first time the Rams had put up 500 yards of offense since back in 2019, which was ironically also on the road against the Cardinals. This was a game the Rams obviously needed as they were coming off of a loss in Carolina in which they turned the ball over 3 times and, well, they took care of business. And this is a really good time to be a football fan as the Rams play the Lions next week and then they go to Seattle next Thursday to play the Seahawks in what could be a bout for the NFC West. The Texans are also huge winners from Week 14 as they defeated the Chiefs 20-10 and have now won 8 of their last 10 games. Houston forced 3 Kansas City turnovers and their defense proved yet again why they are one of, if not the best units in football. Personally, I'd say the best, but you get the point. They're a very elite defense. And earlier in the year when the Texans were 0-3, one of the things I remember hammering home on the channel was if the Texans can just get to the postseason, they're going to be a tough out. Because even when they were 0-3, they had allowed just 51 total points in the first 3 games of the year. All they needed was a little help offensively, which they've received. I know Texans fans feel a certain way about Nick Haley, and I get it, but that's a conversation for another day. And beating the Chiefs in Arrowhead by double digits, and having the Chiefs fall to 6-7, while you improve to 8-5, with a very real reality to finish the year with a 12-5 record, especially with their remaining schedule, well, the Texans season is right in front of them, and at this point, I would be surprised if they don't make the playoffs. They just have to continue taking care of business, and their next 2 games are home games against the Cardinals and Raiders, and I'd be very surprised if they're not 10-5 through 15 games. The Baltimore Ravens are in today's video, and they're in today's video for a couple of reasons. Now, I think we should start by talking about the Isaiah Likely touchdown, and I'm sure that Ravens fans would want that to be brought up. But even if that play happens, even if you beat the Steelers and you're 7-6 through 14 weeks, I would kind of go back to the question and ask and say, hey, do you feel confident that this team can win not just one, but multiple playoff games based on what you've seen through the first 13 games of the year? Because I certainly don't, and that's even in a scenario where they won yesterday, which they of course didn't. And the Ravens right now are not a great team. We've talked about how Lamar Jackson has not been 100% all year, and I think that shows up repeatedly, and there was a lot of frustration within the Week 14 game against the Steelers, also from a coaching standpoint, as the whole 2-minute sequence at the end was really, it was really poor, if we're being honest. That was not a good representation of what teams should do whenever the game is on the line, and then there's also a frustration aspect of the interior offensive line. Now, if you have had the opportunity to talk ball with a Ravens fan, and specifically about right guard number 77, Daniel Faalele, then they probably have some pretty strong feelings about the big fella. Daniel Faalele is not a good player, and if I'm being honest, the best way that I can describe his game, because he's 6'7", 6'8", 380 pounds, he is at the top of the charts in terms of height and weight. The best way that I can describe his game is similar to NBA 2K whenever you create a player and you create a center that you want to play at the park, and he's just running up and down the floor with everybody running by him, and there's nothing you can do. And Daniel Faalele is big, he's awkward, he tries to jump set at times in pass protection, and what a jump set means is as soon as the ball is snapped, he tries to get his hands on the interior defensive lineman in front of him, but because he's not fast enough to be able to do so, a lot of the time they kind of either just bat it away or simply just dip under and run right by him. And there was one rep in particular in the second quarter in Week 14 where Esezi Otomewo, who is a veteran defensive lineman backup, a rotational guy at best, well, he immediately got the best of Daniel Faalele and was right in Lamar Jackson's face immediately after the ball was snapped. And that is the frustration of the Daniel Faalele experience. Not only that, but left guard Andrew Voorhees is also not a great player either, and the Ravens not only have problems at the skill positions offensively, but they also have pretty big problems, no pun intended, along the interior offensive line. From one AFC North team to another, we go to discuss the Cincinnati Bengals, and honestly within this, it's more Bengals fans than the Bengals themselves, because it's really frustrating to watch your favorite team play and know that they played good on one side of the ball and lose. And the Bengals put up 34 points, stop me if you've heard this before, and lose with Joe Burrow as their starting quarterback. Now, obviously I'm not saying Bengals fans are losers personally, but what is really frustrating within this is the sentiment of, hey, I'm getting up at 9 a.m. on a Sunday morning, I'm going to make a good breakfast, I can't wait to watch my team play at 1 p.m. Hooray, we looked good. Our starting quarterback threw for 4 touchdowns. And we lose. And with that loss, we go from 4-8 to 4-9. And what's also really frustrating within this is the Bengals had the path to potentially win the AFC North if everything went according to plan. But the biggest thing is they had to win out. They won out last year to get to 9-8. And as we know, the Bo Nix-led Broncos took the final wildcard spot in place of the Bengals as they defeated the Chiefs 38-0 in Week 18 last year against the Chiefs backups. But that's what it's been for the Bengals over the past couple of years. And also within this, since the 2022 AFC Championship game lost to the Chiefs, we are working on 3 straight years or near a presidential term of the Bengals not going to the postseason with a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback in his prime, along with a Hall of Fame caliber receiver in his prime. That is incredibly unfortunate luck due to injury and also due to how bad the defense has been over the past couple of years. And the defense part, of course, goes back more to the front office with the complete lack of asset allocation or lack of good asset allocation to be able to be put in this position where you are 1-4 in the last 2 years when you put up 38 points or more in a game and still have that type of record. But I really do feel bad for Bengals fans to be put in this position to go on the road in a tough place to play like Buffalo in a snow game that's already not ideal conditions, put up 34 points and still come out on the losing end. The Kansas City Chiefs are up, and the 20-10 loss to the Texans in Week 14 is a good summarization of their season. They hold an opposing team to 20 points at home, they miss a field goal, a player unfortunately goes down on the first play of the game, and you get the point. That is the type of year that it's been for the Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs are also not in a great situation from a roster standpoint, as outside of Chris Jones, they don't have a great pass rush. And there was a point early in the year where George Karlaftis was leading the NFL in pressures, and we've discussed discussed this on the channel before, but him leading the NFL in pressures was due in large part to Chris Jones disrupting the play up front and then the quarterback going to the right side where George Karlaftis in theory could get a pressure because he chased him out of bounds or he chased him into a throwaway, and you get the point. So the Chiefs right now are not a great roster. They are 6-7 and they are probably going to miss the playoffs if we're being completely honest, and I don't know what the long-term outlook of this franchise is. Obviously Patrick Mahomes isn't going anywhere and Creed Humphrey isn't going anywhere, and you can have that conversation about a couple of other players as well, but with where this team was just 2 years ago versus where they are now, well, it's a night and day's difference. The 2022 draft class that looked to be one of the best drafts over the past 6 or 7 years has not performed to the level that you would have expected them to continue to progress based on the first 2 years that we saw over the course of their careers. And right now with the 2024 and 2025 draft classes for the Chiefs, I mean, naturally when you are selecting at the end of the first round, which is pretty much where they are at the end of every year because of the success they've had, well, obviously it's a lot harder to continuously hit on draft picks that late in the draft, and we've seen that over the past couple of years. People that have wanted the Chiefs to fail or people that have wanted the Chiefs to come back down to earth, well, this is what they've been waiting for, and the Chiefs right now are absolutely nowhere close to the same old Kansas City Chiefs, and I think they're in for quite a bit of moves this offseason. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe as a football will appear when you do, and there are also plenty of other winners and losers from Week 14 on the screen right now. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.